The cup was still warm when I walked in. Steam curled up from her favorite floral mug, the one she said she hated but never threw away. Her scarf was hanging unevenly on the coat hook, one side brushing the floor like she left in a hurry. The front door had been locked, but the hallway light was on. We always turned it off. Something was wrong, but I didn't know how wrong. At first, I thought maybe she forgot something and came home during lunch. But there were 2 mugs on the table, 2 spoons in the sink, 2 jackets, hers, and one I'd never seen before. Still, I wasn't thinking betrayal. Not yet. I just stood there, holding the mail like an idiot, my eyes scanning for clues I didn't want to find. The scent hit me next. Cologne. Not mine. Subtle, woodsy, expensive. The kind of smell you can't mistake because it doesn't belong. The stairs creaked above me. Not like a falling hanger or shifting wood. This was the weight of footsteps. Someone was upstairs. With her. I didn't call out. I didn't run. I didn't move for a long time. I just stood in the entryway of my own home, mail slipping from my hand like snow, heart hammering in my ears, listening to laughter. Her laugh. Light. Flirty. Followed by a man's voice that made my skin crawl. I walked up those stairs one at a time. Slowly. Like I was sneaking into someone else's life. Each step louder than the last. The hallway stretched longer than I remembered. And then, I stopped outside our bedroom door, the same door I painted by hand 5 summers ago while she read on the porch pretending not to notice how proud I was. The door was slightly ajar. My breath held itself. My fingers trembled. My stomach turned in on itself. And when I pushed it open, I saw her. But it wasn't just her that broke me. It was who she was with. And what he said when he saw me. He didn't flinch when he saw me. That was the first thing that made my blood freeze. He didn't panic. He didn't jump off her. He just looked at me calmly, like this was some awkward dinner party moment, and I was the one who showed up too early. His eyes didn't say caught. They said, you should have knocked. She gasped, covered herself, whispered my name like it meant anything anymore. But he didn't move, didn't bother to hide. He just looked at me, leaning back on the headboard like he belonged there. Like this was his house now. Like he'd already replaced me, down to the pillow he was resting on, my pillow, the one I've used for years, the one with the barely visible frayed seam she always offered to sew. I couldn't speak. My mouth opened, but nothing came out. And then he smiled. He smiled. You weren't supposed to be home till Sunday, he said, casual, like we were comparing calendars. That's when I knew. This wasn't an affair born out of impulse or alcohol or boredom. This was planned, coordinated, practiced. She looked at me like a stranger. Not with guilt, not even shame. Just discomfort. As if I was interrupting a private moment and not uncovering the total collapse of my reality. I backed out of the room before my knees gave out. I didn't scream. I didn't shout. I didn't throw anything, though I wanted to. I just walked backward down the hall, afraid if I turned my back, it would all become permanent, more real than it already was. Downstairs, I collapsed onto the sofa, the one we bought together on a rainy October afternoon when she insisted on testing every single cushion twice before deciding on the perfect firmness. It still had the indent from her favorite spot. It still smelled like the lavender oil she rubbed into her wrists every night before bed. I stared at the ceiling, waiting for the house to burn down or time to reverse or for someone to walk in and tell me this was some twisted social experiment. But nothing happened. Just the soft creaking above me and the dull ache of my heartbeat in my ears. Then I heard them talking upstairs. Still talking. She was laughing again. Not the wild, carefree laugh she once shared with me, but a quieter, more intimate one. A laugh meant for him. I realized in that moment, this wasn't a mistake they got caught in. This was a routine, and I was the one out of sync. I couldn't stay in that house. Couldn't breathe with their voices circling above me like smoke. So I left. I didn't grab my keys or jacket or even my shoes. I walked out barefoot, like a ghost trying to remember how to exist. The street was quiet. Just birds. A neighbor trimming hedges. A world that didn't know I had just unraveled. I got into my car. Drove without direction. Every street looked unfamiliar, like my city had changed overnight. I ended up in the parking lot of a 24-hour laundromat, the same one where she once waited for me after our first big fight. She sat in the window back then, clutching a paper cup of vending machine coffee, crying, waiting for me to forgive her for something that now feels microscopic. I sat in that lot for 3 hours, watching the dryer spin through the window, wondering what had spun out of me over the past year, how I hadn't noticed the shift, how I had let someone else become more hers than I was. And that's when my phone buzzed. Not a call, not a message. A notification from our shared calendar app. An event she must have forgotten to delete. Check-in, the Haven Hotel, 6 p.m., room 214. They weren't just careless. They were comfortable. Too comfortable. I stared at that screen until the time changed. 5:51 p.m. Then 5:52. I didn't think. I didn't plan. I just drove. Not to scream. Not to confront. But to confirm how much of our life had already been moved into someone else's hands. And what I found in that hotel room. That's a chapter one didn't even think people like me ever had to live through. The Haven Hotel was one of those places that pretended to be more than it was. Marble-patterned floors that were just vinyl. Dim lobby lighting to hide the wear on the armchairs. Scented air that tried to mask the age of the building. The kind of place you book when you're doing something you're not proud of, but still want it to feel special. Room 214. I remember the door before anything else. How it stood there, perfectly ordinary, beige, humming with quiet betrayal. I don't know what I thought I'd find. I had no plan. No weapon but my silence. No armor but my denial. I didn't even knock. I just waited outside, pretending I was somewhere else. I could hear voices inside, muffled, indistinct, but comfortable. That word again. I kept coming back to it. They were comfortable. When the door finally opened, it wasn't her who stood there. It was him. Again. Still smug. Still shirtless. Still existing in a world where I was just an inconvenience, not a threat. Man. Seriously? He muttered, as if I'd forgotten something and come back to interrupt. As if this wasn't my marriage. My house. My wife. I stepped inside. I didn't wait for an invitation. The room was dim. One of the nightstand lamps was on. There was a bottle of wine, half empty, and 2 glasses. The curtains were drawn. Music was playing again, low jazz. Same genre, different song. Like it was their theme. She came out of the bathroom wearing nothing but a towel, brushing her teeth. When she saw me, she didn't scream. She didn't cover herself. She didn't drop the toothbrush. She just froze. Toothpaste dripping down her chin, her eyes wide, not with guilt, but fear. Not fear of me hurting her. No, fear of something else. I should have spoken. I should have yelled, cried, demanded answers. But I couldn't. My voice got stuck somewhere between my ribs and the realization that the woman I married was gone long before I got here. She sat on the edge of the bed without saying a word. That's when I noticed it, on the nightstand next to her side. A small black notebook. Her handwriting on the cover. For us. It was a journal. Their journal. Pages of entries. Sketch plans. Future getaways. Pet names. Private jokes. There was even a checklist. Tell Elwood after his birthday. Clear photos from cloud. Find temporary place 2 months max. Start therapy, just in case. They weren't having an affair. They were building a transition. Replacing me wasn't a risk for her. It was a scheduled event. That's when I realized I'd been demoted long ago. She just forgot to send the memo. And the worst part? They didn't even look sorry. Not really. He looked annoyed. She looked inconvenienced. And me? I looked like a lost man crashing someone else's dream life. I left without taking the journal. I didn't want their future in my hands. I wanted my dignity, or whatever scrap of it hadn't been folded into their hotel sheets. I don't remember the drive home. I remember the rain. Heavy. Unforgiving. I remember pulling into a gas station and staring at my reflection in the window of the mini-mart, wondering how long I'd been invisible. Wondering if I'd ever stop being the kind of man people planned around like a broken piece of furniture, something you avoid mentioning but eventually toss out. When I got home, I stood in the middle of the living room and waited for the anger. It never came. Just silence. Just that damn mug, still sitting on the table. And then, a new notification. Not from her. Not from him. From someone I hadn't heard from in 3 years. Someone who shouldn't have known any of this was happening. And that message? It changed everything. The message read, "You're not crazy. I've known for a while. We need to talk. V." I stared at it for longer than I'd like to admit. My screen dimmed. I tapped it back to life. Still there. Same name. Same message. No punctuation out of place. Just the cool detachment of someone who had been waiting for the moment I'd hit rock bottom. V? There was only one person I knew with that initial. Vivian. Vivian was Blythe's former best friend. The maid of honor who vanished 3 years ago after a falling out so abrupt, we never got a full explanation. One day, they were inseparable. The next, her name was banned from our dinner table like some excommunicated ghost. When I once asked Blythe what happened, she muttered something about boundaries and drama, then changed the subject before I could blink. And now she was messaging me, as if she'd been waiting behind some invisible curtain for the play to collapse. I didn't reply right away. I didn't know how. Part of me wondered if this was a trap. Maybe Blythe and her lover were trying to bait me into doing something reckless so they could play the victims. But something about the timing, and the simplicity of her words, felt too precise to be coincidental. So I responded, "How long have you known?" The reply came fast. "Since last winter. I saw them. I warned her I'd tell you if it ever went too far. Looks like it has." My throat tightened. Since last winter? Almost a year? A year of me apologizing for not being exciting anymore. A year of her late-night walks, her yoga retreats, her new perfume, her new smile. All the signs had been there. I just didn't have the courage to read them. Vivian asked to meet the next day. Somewhere public. Neutral. She said she had something to give me. Something she didn't want to send digitally. I said yes before I could overthink it. Because suddenly, I needed answers more than I needed pride. The next morning felt like waking up inside a war I didn't remember enlisting in. I sat on the edge of the bed, alone, staring at my phone as it buzzed uselessly on the nightstand. Blythe hadn't called. She hadn't texted. No apology. No explanation. No follow-up to the night at the hotel. Like I was just a phase she'd completed. A loose end that didn't need tying. I met Vivian at a cafe by the train station. She looked older, not in the way time does to people, but in the way truth does. Like she'd been carrying weight too heavy for too long. She didn't hug me. She didn't smile. She slid an envelope across the table like we were spies, and then she just said, "I wanted to tell you sooner, but I knew you wouldn't believe me." Inside the envelope were photos. Time-stamped. Dated. Different locations. Always the same two faces, Blythe and him. Sometimes it was just a kiss. Sometimes it was a full embrace in the backseat of a car. Once, and this one punched the breath from my lungs, she was sitting on a hotel balcony in a robe, laughing while he fed her something off a spoon. The photos weren't just damning. They were comfortable. I had to excuse myself halfway through. My legs weren't working right. I felt nauseous, dizzy, as if the ground had shifted and no one else had noticed. When I came back, Vivian was still sitting there, calm, almost mournful. She cut me off because I told her this would hurt you in ways she couldn't undo. I told her it wasn't about falling out of love, it was about decency. She said I was being dramatic, that you'd be fine, that you'd find yourself after. Find myself? Like she'd already written the after story of our marriage and cast herself as the misunderstood woman who had to follow her truth, while I got to be the husk she left behind? Vivian wasn't done. She handed me a USB stick next. There's more. I found some things by accident. Voice notes, text backups, maybe a few videos. It's all real. Just be ready. I asked her why she still cared. She looked at me for a long time before answering. Because you were the only one who ever believed she was better than she really was. That sentence broke something in me. Because it was true. I spent years building a version of Blythe that never actually existed. A patient, complicated, emotionally tangled masterpiece of a woman, when maybe, just maybe, she was never any of those things. Maybe she was just a better liar than I gave her credit for. I went home that afternoon and didn't turn on the lights. I stared at the USB for hours before I plugged it in. And what I found on it wasn't just betrayal. It was premeditated erasure. The kind of things that make you question if you ever really shared a life with someone, or if they just used your heart as a waiting room for their next act. The file wasn't labeled. Just a random string of numbers and letters. No title, no context. I almost skipped it, assuming it was corrupted or leftover junk data from some app cache. But I clicked it anyway, because at this point, what hadn't already collapsed? It was audio. At first, nothing but the soft hum of background noise, distant traffic, maybe a ceiling fan. Then, her voice. Her voice. "Okay, this is stupid," she said, followed by nervous laughter. "But if I'm gonna do this, I want it saved. Just once. So I can remember why." Then silence. And then, her again. Lower this time. Slower. Not like she was reading a script. More like she was finally being honest with someone who wasn't me. "I know I'm not supposed to feel this happy," she said. "But I do. With you, I feel like I get to be who I really am. Elwood makes me feel safe, and I'm grateful for that. But I'm tired of being safe. I want to be alive. I want passion. I want danger. I want someone who makes me forget to check my phone. And you, God, you make me forget everything." She paused. There was a clinking of glass. A soft sigh. "I'll tell him after his birthday." I promise. I want one more weekend where he doesn't know. One more weekend where I'm still the good wife in his eyes. Where he's still clueless and sweet and thinks the world hasn't shifted under his feet. I know that's cruel, but I need it. I need the contrast to remind me why I'm choosing this. Choosing this. I stopped the recording there. Not because I couldn't take more, though I couldn't, but because that sentence carved into me like a slow-turning knife. She needed my ignorance to enjoy her affair more. My love became part of their fantasy. My trust was her contrast. My life, her backdrop. I sat in that dark room for what felt like hours, the USB still glowing in the side of my laptop like an exposed nerve. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just kept hearing her words echo back, over and over, until they became something almost chant-like, ritualistic. I need one more weekend where he doesn't know. I looked at the other files. Some were messages. Some were saved screenshots of text between her and him. Jokes about me. About how I still wore socks to bed like a grandpa. About how I probably thought she was at yoga while she was in the back seat of his car. One of them, and this one gutted me, was a meme she sent him. It was a cartoon of a man watering a dead plant, smiling while the plant rotted. She captioned it, "Elwood in a nutshell." That was the moment I realized I'd been grieving the wrong version of her. I hadn't lost a partner. I'd lost a performance. A long-running, carefully rehearsed role she had outgrown. And worse, she had grown to mock. And then, tucked deep in one of the folders, like it had been saved for last, I found something else. A document. Not audio. Not text messages. A rental agreement. Signed. In both their names. Move-in date, 3 weeks from now. New city. New zip code. A different life, planned down to the square footage. They had already found a place. Already picked it out. It was happening. Official. Coordinated. Legal. I wasn't even a footnote in her next chapter. I was the expired warranty. I paced for hours that night. Tried to sleep on the couch. Ended up sitting at the edge of the tub staring at the wall like it held answers I didn't have the language to ask for. Then I did something I'm not proud of. I called her mother. She didn't pick up the first time. Or the second. But eventually, around 2:17 a.m., she answered. Groggy. Cautious. Kind. I didn't give her any warning. Just blurted it all out. What I found. What I heard. What I saw. I don't know what I expected, some kind of rage? Denial? Maybe her defending her daughter to the death? But instead, her voice broke. And what she said to me, I'll never unhear it. She's been doing this since she was 16. Elwood. I'm sorry. I tried to warn her when she started with you. I told her, don't ruin him. But I guess some people can't help but set fires just to feel the heat. There was nothing left to say. I hung up, and for the first time in this entire nightmare, I felt like I wasn't the only person who saw the smoke. But the fire wasn't done burning yet, because 2 days later, she came home. And what happened in our living room that night? It didn't just fracture whatever was left of us. It tore straight through everything I believed about myself. She didn't knock. She didn't text ahead. No warning. No explanation. She just unlocked the door and walked in like it was any other Tuesday night, like I hadn't heard her confess love for someone else, like I hadn't watched her future unfold without me in a hotel room and on a USB stick full of betrayal. Her hair was pulled up. Casual. Effortless. She wore a sweatshirt that didn't belong to me and carried an overpriced iced coffee like she was returning from a harmless Target run. And for a moment, I genuinely thought maybe I had hallucinated everything. Maybe the recordings, the photos, the rental agreement, all of it was some paranoid delusion stitched together by a heart that couldn't accept being unloved. But then she smiled. A soft, guilty smile. Not the kind that said, I missed you, but the kind you give a stranger you cut in front of at the store, apologetic, but not enough to move out of the way. Hey, she said. That was it. No apology. No panic. Just hey. I didn't speak. I just sat on the armrest of the couch, watching her as she dropped her keys into the bowl by the door. Our bowl, the one we bought at a craft market on our anniversary trip 3 years ago. She slipped off her shoes. Walked toward the kitchen. I followed her with my eyes, not my feet. I didn't trust my legs to hold me if I stood. She opened the fridge. Pulled out the oat milk. Poured it into her drink. Stirred it gently. And then, as if she remembered she owed me some sort of acknowledgement, she finally said it. I know you're upset. Upset. That word hit me harder than any insult could have. She called what she did upsetting. As if I had just come home to find we were out of eggs. I stood up. Not fast. Not angry. Just steady. Controlled. I know, I said quietly. I listened to everything, read everything, saw it, all of it. She froze, the spoon still turning in the cup. Everything. I nodded. Everything. There was a pause, not of guilt, not of fear, but calculation. She was measuring her next words, weighing how much truth she could afford to admit without losing control of the conversation. And then she said it. I didn't want you to find out like that. Like that. Like it was the method, not the content, that had shattered me. I took a slow step toward her. Why him? I asked. My voice cracked despite every effort to sound composed. Why someone who watched me shake his hand? Who sat at our table? Why not a stranger if you were going to destroy us anyway? She looked away. Because he listened. I blinked. I didn't. She didn't answer. Just stared down at her cup as if the ice melting inside it held more value than the years I spent loving her. Then she said, "You were always so gentle. Safe. Predictable." I swallowed the word predictable like a shard of glass. She said it the same way someone might describe a meal without seasoning, polite, but void of hunger. And that was a bad thing? I asked. She turned to me now, eyes wet but not crying. I wanted to feel something bigger. I needed more. More than loyalty? More than consistency? More than showing up every day and choosing you even when I wasn't being chosen back. She didn't speak. And that silence was the first honest answer she gave me all night. We stood like that for what felt like hours, her clinging to a half-finished coffee like it could protect her from consequence, and me gripping the last thread of whatever dignity I had left. Then I asked the question I never thought I'd have to ask the woman I married. Were you ever going to tell me? She didn't look at me when she said it. I was hoping you'd leave first. I flinched. Like she'd slapped me, except this hurt worse because it wasn't impulsive. It was rehearsed. She had hoped I would break so she wouldn't have to bear the guilt of ending it herself. I walked to the hallway closet, pulled out the box I'd packed days ago, set it down on the floor beside her. This has everything you ever gave me, I said. Letters, gifts, photos, the little notebook where you used to write me love notes during lunch breaks. I couldn't throw it away, but I also can't carry it anymore. She reached for it, but I stepped in front of her. One condition, I said. Before you take that, I want you to listen to something. I pulled out my phone, scrolled to the audio file. The one where she confessed to needing one more weekend where I didn't know. Her face changed the moment her voice played from the speaker. Her eyes didn't well with regret. They darted around the room, like she was calculating exit points. Embarrassment, not remorse. I let it play for 15 seconds before I stopped it. You didn't just lie, I said. You used me. My loyalty made your affair more thrilling. My faithfulness became your mirror. And I won't let you leave here thinking you fooled me. You didn't. You broke me. But you didn't fool me. She picked up the box. Didn't say a word. Didn't even say goodbye. She walked out of our house the same way she walked into it, as if she owned every room, every moment, every version of me that had ever believed we were real. But that silence didn't feel like the end. It felt like an opening. Because the next day, he reached out to me. And what he said, it didn't just twist the knife, it flipped the entire story upside down. The message came in just after 1 a.m. It was a simple notification from a number I didn't recognize, but the preview text made my blood run cold. I need to talk. It's not what you think. I stared at it in the dark, lit only by the blue light of my phone screen. I didn't know whether to laugh, cry, or throw the phone across the room. Not what I think. After all I'd seen, heard, and lived through, this was the line he thought would hook me? Still, something made me respond. Maybe I needed one final confrontation. Maybe I just wanted to hear him choke on whatever excuse he'd rehearsed. But a part of me, a part one hated, wanted answers. Not closure. Not peace. Just the raw, sour truth. The kind you can't unhear. The kind that scars properly. So I agreed to meet him. We chose neutral ground. A late-night diner just off the highway, open all night, half-lit, and empty except for a tired-looking waitress who didn't even look up when we sat down. He looked worse than I expected. The smugness was gone. The confidence erased. His hands were jittery. His eyes kept scanning the windows like he was being followed. Not the posture of a man who won the girl. This was a man who looked like he'd lost something or was about to. He didn't start with an apology. He didn't even say hello. His first words were, "She's not who you think she is." I leaned back, crossing my arms. Yeah, I figured that out somewhere between the hotel room and the voice memos. He winced. I didn't know she recorded things. I said nothing. She told me you were a control freak, he continued. That you made her feel small. That you never let her breathe. Said you tracked her phone, checked her texts. That you were borderline abusive. I blinked. She said that. He nodded. She made me feel like I was saving her. I was too stunned to respond. My hands curled into fists under the table, not out of rage, but because I realized just how well she had played both of us. She didn't just cheat. She engineered a narrative. She painted me as the villain so she could feel righteous in her betrayal. And he had eaten it up like scripture. She's different now, he said. Colder. More calculated. She talks about you like you were some phase. She's already moving on from me, too. I can feel it. She keeps checking her messages when I'm talking. Leaves the room to take calls. Laughs at texts she won't show me. She's already cheating on you, I said flatly. He didn't argue. He looked me in the eye for the first time. You think I'm a piece of garbage? I probably am. But I didn't start this thinking I was the bad guy. I believed everything she told me. I thought I was doing the right thing. Until last week. Until she told me, he trailed off. Told you what? I asked. He swallowed hard. She said she was pregnant. The diner went silent, even though no one had been speaking but us. I felt my body tense. My throat dried out instantly. I asked her if it was mine, he said, voice cracking. She laughed. Said she hoped it wasn't. Then said, either way, I won't keep it. It's too inconvenient right now. I looked at him, this man I hated, pitted, and now felt oddly parallel to, and I saw someone who had also been dismantled, piece by piece, until all that remained was shame and confusion. She uses people, he whispered. That's her talent. She makes you feel chosen, needed, essential until you aren't. And then she moves on like you were never real. He reached into his jacket and slid an envelope across the table. These are screenshots. Messages. Voice clips. Things she sent me. You should have them. Maybe you'll need them. I didn't take it. Not yet. Just stared at the man across from me and asked the only question left in me. Why are you really here? He didn't hesitate. Because if I don't get out now, I'll end up like you. I left the envelope untouched. Walked out into the cold night, the air sharp in my lungs, the stars above unfamiliar and distant. I didn't feel vindicated. I didn't feel strong. I felt like someone who had just stepped out of a burning building only to realize the fire had followed him. When I got home, I finally opened the envelope. And what I found inside wasn't just proof. It was evidence. Evidence that could, and would, destroy her carefully constructed image. Her career. Her circle. Her safety net. But would I use it? That was the question I wrestled with through the night. Because revenge has a gravity to it. And once you start falling, sometimes there's no pulling back. I didn't sleep the night I met him. I sat with the envelope on the coffee table, unopened again, even though I'd already read the contents twice. His voice still echoed in my head, that quiet warning that she'd do to him what she'd done to me. And maybe to the next man after him, too. She was never falling in love. She was just climbing, using hearts as handrails. But by morning, something in me had changed. I made coffee without shaking. I opened the curtains instead of sitting in the dark. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror and looked at my reflection, not to mourn who I used to be, but to take inventory of who was still standing. For the first time in weeks, the man looking back at me didn't seem like a ghost. He just looked free. That afternoon, I called a lawyer. Not to seek revenge. Not to expose her. I wasn't interested in wrecking what was left of her carefully curated life. She could do that on her own time. I just wanted out, officially, legally, and with nothing tying me to the version of myself I had been while loving her. The lawyer was kind, efficient, clear. And by the time I signed the first round of paperwork, I felt something shift in my chest. A lightness. Not joy. Not yet. But air, clean air after months of emotional smoke inhalation. I didn't confront her again. I didn't send the files to her boss, her friends, or her family. I didn't share the audio. I deleted it. All of it. Not because I was protecting her, but because I was finally done carrying the burden of her truth. It was hers to live with now, not mine. I started walking every morning. Small laps around the park down the street, earbuds in, podcasts playing softly while the sunrise smeared color back into my world. I went back to teaching. I told my students I'd been sick, which wasn't exactly a lie. They welcomed me with clumsy jokes and a "we missed you" card filled with doodles. It was the first thing I'd smiled at in weeks. And then something happened that I hadn't planned for. One day after class, a coworker I barely knew, Miranda, from the science wing, stopped me in the hallway. She said she'd heard I was going through something heavy. She didn't pry. She just handed me a thermos of tea and said, "If you ever want to talk, I'm around." No judgment. I've been through my own version. I didn't take her up on it right away, but I kept the thermos. Used it every day. Weeks passed. I started sleeping again, eating real food, laughing in small bursts. Miranda and I began having lunch together in the break room, swapping stories about our students, our terrible coffee, our mutual hatred of noisy hallways. She never once asked about Blythe. She didn't need to. Her presence wasn't about fixing me. It was about letting me breathe. One evening, she asked what I'd do now that I had no one to plan around. I said I didn't know. She smiled and said, "That's the best place to start." And she was right. I didn't rebuild my life all at once. There was no montage, no moment of triumph with fireworks in the sky. Just quiet victories, changing passwords, buying new bedsheets, repainting the living room, going a full day without replaying her voice in my head. I didn't become someone new. I remembered who I was before I spent years dimming myself to make someone else shine. And eventually, I stopped saying she left me. Because the truth was, I walked away. And in doing so, I finally came home to myself.